You've been walking around like no one notices, like your existence is some side note in the grand story. But here's the twist: the ones at the top, the ones who don't blink unless there's a reason, yeah, they've noticed. They've been watching silently, patiently. Not the surface stuff. No, that's too easy. They saw past the noise, past the pretending, past the "I'm fine" and the watered down ambition. They saw the flare inside the fog, and now they want a closer look. Attention from the top means your silence made noise. Funny, isn't it? You spend all that time thinking you're invisible, that staying quiet keeps you safe, that blending in will help you survive the chaos. But the thing is, silence screams, especially when it's coming from someone who should be roaring. See, the watchers at the top, they don't care about noise made for show. They ignore the clowns yelling for attention, the puppets pulling strings just to be seen. No, they're scanning for his disruptions, subtle ones, quiet ones, the kind that ripple through systems without ever raising their voice. You didn't even notice you did it, did you? Maybe you moved differently. Maybe you didn't buy into the lies. Maybe you chose restraint when the world demanded performance. Or maybe, just maybe, you stopped playing their game. That's the moment they heard you. The moment your silence cut through all the static like a razor in the dark. And now the ones at the top, they're curious. That kind of silence doesn't come from confusion. It comes from power, from control, from someone who knows exactly what they're carrying, but hasn't unleashed it yet. They saw you sitting still while everyone else panicked. They watched you hold back while the crowd chased validation like candy. They noticed that you were watching too, calculating, weighing, observing the madness. And that kind of silence, it's unsettling. It's not silence at all. It's a strategy, and that's what sets off the alarms. You weren't hiding, you were waiting. And those who wait with intention are more dangerous than those who scream with no plan. That's what caught their eye. You think you've been overlooked, that your time hasn't come, but from up there, you've been glowing like a target, not because you made noise, but because you didn't. Because your presence was felt in the absence of sound. Because when the room got loud, you laughed and didn't flinch. That's not apathy. That's focus. That's weight. And the top level watchers, they don't miss weight. They monitor shifts in atmosphere. You didn't speak, but you altered the temperature. You didn't act, but something and changed. And now they want to know why. They don't send scouts for echo chambers. They don't study people who conform perfectly. They zone in on the ones who pose a risk to the order, the quiet ones, the restrained ones, the ones who aren't trying to be seen because they already know they are. You never needed the spotlight, and that's exactly why it's finding you. Because people who don't chase attention are the ones who know how to wield it. They started watching when you stopped begging. When you started moving like someone who wasn't waiting for permission. You thought they didn't see you, but the second you chose an intention over applause, the top took notice. You became a variable they couldn't predict, a silence they couldn't decode. And now they're circling, watching, leaning in, not to clap, not to cheer, but to assess, to measure what kind of threat your potential really is. Your silence wasn't passive. It was a message. And that message got delivered loud and clear to the rooms you didn't even know were listening. You didn't knock on the door. You shifted the building. And now the ones who built it want to meet the reason the foundation shook. You're being studied for your potential, not your past. They already know your past. Every fall, every failure, every little breakdown you swore would be the end. They've seen it all. It's not interesting. It's predictable. Pain, regret, struggle, everyone has that story. What they care about isn't where you've been. It's what you haven't stepped into yet. That thing you've been hiding. That spark under the surface. That weight you carry in your chest that no one else seems to notice. But they do. Oh, they notice. Because potential, that's dangerous. It's not loud. It doesn't wear a label. And it doesn't come with a warning sign. It walks in quietly and shifts the entire equation. That's why they study you. Not because of who you were, but because of what you might become if nobody stops you. And that's the game, isn't it? Not to punish you for your past, but to calculate the threat of your future. To assess whether you'll use what's been buried in you or let it rot. Because if you do use it, things break. They're not watching your failures like you are. You obsess over them, replaying every mistake like a broken record. But they're looking at the places where you should have collapsed, but didn't. The moments you could have snapped but stayed silent. You call it weakness. They call it restraint. You call it a breakdown. They call it pressure tested. Because surviving what you did and still showing up, that's not shameful. That's proof. Proof you haven't even scratched the surface yet. And that terrifies them. See the ones at the top. They know how this works. They've seen raw potential rise before. And when it's ignored, it fizzles. But when they've harnessed, it changes landscapes. So they study you closely. They dissect the way you speak, the way you move, the way you don't move. Every delay, noted every hesitation, tracked. Because what you carry could either reshape the system or become its slave. And they need to know which way you're leaning. They're not interested in your highlight reel. They're listening between the words, watching for the parts you think nobody sees, the way you flinch when truth hits, the way your eyes narrow when you hear something that challenges you. They're looking for activation, not perfection. For the moment your potential stops being theoretical and starts being kinetic, that's when things get real. That's when observers become opponents. Because potential that moves is a threat. You've been treating your gifts like accidents, shrinking down every time someone points them out, laughing them off, hiding them behind excuses like not now or not me. But they see through all that. They see the blueprint behind your eyes. They see what could be built if you stopped trying to be small enough to be loved. That's what they're studying, the possibility of you. The version you keep trying to mute, hoping it'll just go away. But it won't. It wasn't designed to stay quiet. It was designed to erupt. You're being watched because you're still unfinished, and that makes you volatile, unpredictable, dangerous in all the right ways. You don't even realize what you're carrying, but they do. That's why they haven't looked away. Not for 1 second. Because if the switch ever flips, if the potential ever becomes purpose, you'll stop being a subject in their little study and start becoming a force they can't contain. Your silence and excuses are being recorded. Every time you say, "I'm not ready," they take note. Every time you pretend not to hear the call that keeps showing up in your gut, they log it. You think nobody's watching just because nobody's clapping. Cute. But the truth is, every delay, every excuse, every moment you sit on your hands while the fire inside you burns is being documented. Not by man, not by the masses, but by the ones who understand that wasted potential is more dangerous than failure. They see the pattern, not just the moments you speak, but the ones you don't. Not just what you do, but what you'll refuse to. You might think you're hiding behind timing or life's just hard right now, but the silence you think is harmless. It's deafening, especially when it's coming from someone who was built to disrupt. See, silence from noise makers is expected, but silence from weapons, that's a red flag. That's cause for alarm. They know you've got something because you're avoiding it. Excuses sound like lullabies to the comfortable, but to the watchers, they're signals, codes, patterns of behavior that say, this one's dangerous but asleep. So they circle, they observe, they wait, because they know something you haven't accepted yet. You weren't designed for safety. You weren't built to blend. And when someone like you stays quiet too long, it's only ever for one of two reasons: fear or denial. They're not judging the pain. They're measuring the pattern, because pain is human. But repetition, that's intention. When you keep showing up with the same excuse, the same story, the same next time, that's no longer struggle. That's a choice. And when powerful people see you choosing to play small, they ask why. Because the ones who sleep on their purpose usually carry something that scares even them. You've convinced yourself you need more time, more clarity, more strength. But what if time's up? What if the next phase isn't about more, but about movement? They're not recording your silence just to shame you. They're tracking it because silence is data, and in your case, it's a valuable data. It tells them what you really fear, not failure. No, that's not it. You're not afraid of falling flat. You're afraid of what happens if you don't. If you finally rise and the world sees you without the mask, they see you holding back, smiling through storms, laughing off destiny like it's just some joke. But they're not laughing, they're writing, logging, studying the moments you were supposed to speak but didn't, the doors you didn't walk through, the battles you never entered. Not because you weren't called, but because you weren't convinced. You wanted a sign. Meanwhile, you were the sign. And now that you've stalled so many times, the silence itself has become your message. You don't realize how loud you are when you say nothing, not to them. They see your potential like a loaded weapon just sitting on a table, collecting dust, untouched, untapped, dangerous because it hasn't gone off yet. And every time you reach for it, only to pull back, they note that too. Because people who hover that close to purpose and still retreat, those are the ones you watch closest. Those are the ones who either explode or disappear. They're not angry. They're interested in whether you're going to keep wasting breath talking yourself out of destiny. Interested in whether the silence will win. Because excuses may work on your friends, your family, even yourself. But to those watching from the top, it's just noise in a quiet room. And it says everything. Only those with potential are placed under surveillance. Not the loud ones. Not the flashy ones. No, the watchers don't care about them. They're distractions, entertainers, noise to keep the crowd busy. But the ones who get watched, the ones who feel the weight of invisible eyes, those are the ones with something hidden, something sharp, something real. You're not being followed because you're famous. You're being followed because you're dangerous in ways you don't even understand yet. Ever notice how the pressure starts building when you finally stop pretending? When you start walking like you, no, something's inside you. That's when things shift. That's when eyes find you in places you didn't expect. Not always literal, but you feel it. Like the room changes when you enter. Like silence gets heavier when you speak. You chalk it up to anxiety, maybe paranoia. But it's not that. It's awareness. It's the response of a system that's trying to figure out what to do with someone who's stopped playing the part they were given. See, people who pose no threat don't get studied. They don't get labeled, tracked, or tested. They live freely in the open because there's nothing in them that might interrupt the cycle. But when you carry something different, something sacred, weighty, unstable, that's when the eyes come out. That's when the pressure rises. That's when doors start opening with strings attached. Not because you're special to them, but because you're a variable that hasn't been controlled yet. The ones who get watched are the ones who stopped being predictable. You stopped echoing what everyone else was saying. You stopped waiting for permission. And when a person stops being programmable, they become a question mark And power doesn't like question marks. So what does it do? It studies, it records, it tests, not to destroy you. No, that would be too easy. It wants to see if you'll destroy yourself first. You thought that battle in your mind was just personal, that confusion, that tension, the constant pulling between who you were and who you're supposed to be. No, that's surveillance. That's pressure applied in silence. That's the watchers tweaking the temperature to see when you'll boil. They're not after your destruction. They're after your blueprint. They want to understand how someone like you was built, how someone with your background, your scars, your story, still hasn't broken like you were supposed to. Because you weren't meant to be studied. You were meant to be feared. But if they can understand you, decode your patterns, dissect your hesitations, they think they can contain you. That's why you feel like you're under a microscope. Because you are. Not to shame you, to analyze you, the quiet ones, the thinkers, the ones who walk through fire without broadcasting it. Those are the anomalies. And anomalies get attention. Ever wonder why the weight hasn't let up? Why the pressure feels heavier the more honest you become? That's not punishment. That's feedback. You're triggering sensors. Your movement is being tracked not by GPS, but by impact. You don't need to announce yourself. Your energy arrives first. And that energy, it messes with things. It rearranges rooms. It causes discomfort in places built for control. That's why you're being watched. Not because of what you've done, but because of what you might still do. They don't watch those who've given up. They watch those who still have our choice. And your existence right now is proof that you haven't folded. Not fully. You still carry that thing they can't replicate, can't buy, can't fake. That's why you're under their eye. Because something in you still bends reality. And that kind of power, it can't be ignored.